presented in Saxon to Gottlieb Ackermann's parents. No pathway is or ever will be more accessible than that given to humanity in the gospel, the apostolic and prophetic word, which has been and is still being given purely, without additions, through the Holy Spirit. The testimonies go on this way, and we wonder about the energy that must have been needed to proclaim these messages, to try to virtually change and persuade the people he addressed. It would have required total trust. In this trusting way, Christian Metz went on with his entrusted mission. And then, and then in 1842, after the testimonies clearly advised leaving Germany and going westward, the community came to America. Christian Metz died here in Amana in 1867. I will close with what I wrote as the introduction to his Historische Beschreibung. We have no photograph or portrait. We have no first or even second mind remembrance of Christian Metz, the founder of Amana. Yet his very soul is in every keystone. The history written by Christian Metz, well, as I say, it's the introduction to the Historische Beschreibung. So this history, written by Christian Metz in 1844, is the work of a busy man, a man not preoccupied with the past, but involved in the present. In response to urging, he agreed to record his recollections. In his telling of that story, we get a better understanding of Christian Metz. This work depicts a quick, energetic, at times confident, at other times hesitant man. It depicts a very powerful person who was often overcome by doubt. But always, and in all things, it is the story of a human being entirely subservient to God. Resisting his ego, his pride, his very self, he embodied the term Selbstvernichtigung, self-negation. This, a state most difficult to achieve, becomes the essential stance for employment as an instrument of the Lord. While Christian Metz did, and future Werkzeuge might yet achieve that advanced state, it must not be assumed that this state precludes human sin. Since all mankind is sinful, God cannot employ a perfect, sinless instrument to do his work on earth. Therefore, he uses the humble, the submissive, the obedient, and gives them his power, his gift, his love, and his word. Inspired by God, Christian Metz led the group of persecuted inspirationists from their homes in Germany and Switzerland to a gathering place in the Fürstentum of Isenburg in Hesse. His energy spirited them across the Atlantic, and his vision, the cabinet maker's eye, built the settlement of Ebenezer in New York, and with all the impetus that remained, he established Amana. Clearly, it took more than one man's labor to accomplish all that. But the vision, the goal, the very heart of the dream resided within one man, and that man, enlivened and inspired by God, was Christian Metz. If you have any questions.
I have one. What did the guys in Darmstadt say about that?
You know, that's hardly ever mentioned.
But did they accept it or reject it, or what did they do?
I think they more or less rejected it.
Yeah.
But it made no difference to anyone
they were
at that
already
point.
on the road.
Because they were already on the way, yes.
Yeah.
But I think in that very delay was a form of allowance or permission for
Yeah.
them to go on the way they were and then get out before, and I think that's what they did.
Yeah.
It didn't seem to bother anybody.
They were on the
And
way.
even the people who were, there were lots of people living around the estates who were employed in the community. They were in the woolen mills or wherever. And those people, while they probably were a little resentful that these people come in and do these things, they nevertheless earned their paycheck there. So there was a little bit of just letting it happen going on, I think, all over. Arcee?
In the interaction between Christian and the scribes, do you have any idea actually how that took place? Was it continuous? Were there intermissions? Was there corrections or anything like that? Or do you just talk and they just keep on writing?
Well, the best explanation for that is in this blue book. Arcee, there's a letter in here by Blasius Daniel Macanade, who was a J.F. Rock scribe in Germany from 1714, I think, to I don't know, whatever. Anyway, he was a scribe for Rock, and he was a scribe mostly for J.A. Gruber, E.L.'s son. And those two, Macanade and Gruber, eventually came to America, settled in Germantown in 1728. Then, at the time of Brother Rock's death in 1749, Macanade sent a letter back, and in it he explained his thinking of having been a scribe. And in it he said that oftentimes he would know the content of what was to be said before the Werkzeug said it. It seems to be a matter of God inspiring both the scribe and the Werkzeug. And so, no, there isn't really ever any mention of corrections, but there is mention that the Werkzeug delivered with closed eyes, there were closed eyes when he spoke, and also that there was no recollection by the Werkzeug of what he had said or she had said afterwards.
A follow-up. Did the scribes work in graphite? They didn't carry ink. I mean, how did they go to scribing?
Well, I think that depends on the era. In the 1700s, I think that was all probably in graphite, but I think by the time of Metz's, it became ink.
No, I think it was the other way around.
You
Mom.
do?
Yeah, because ink was before graphite.
Oh,
Graphite is pencils.
okay.
No, and they sometimes wrote on wax tablets with a stylus in shorthand. They had their own system of shorthand, and so it would be either a wax tablet, or they would write with it's called sometimes a crayon or a chalk on a tablet also. The scribes would, again in their shorthand, and then afterwards, if there were two scribes, they would sit down and they would compare, and then they would write out what's called a clean copy of the final sources.
Yeah.
And that's the one that is then printed or would be distributed in manuscripts to other people around. And the frustrating thing is we don't have any scraps of paper that show those examples of the shorthand that the scribes use to record the testimonies. And also, on the Werkzeug's side, they were typically aware that they were being recorded, so they purposely would speak very slowly, emphasizing each syllable. So it was kind of a joint venture to make sure they ended up with the correct copy.
You know, that Isabel notes, and I believe other scholars in Germany have made mention that this is one of the first very early instances of the German language being word for word recorded.
Yeah,
Right,
Ulf Schneider says that.
Ulf Schneider,
Yeah, in his book.
And then
I said this is the word of God. It has to be perfect. We have to record it
to make
absolutely
it perfect.
Yeah.
There's
So
that one.
sometimes when there was shorthand, there can be I've seen examples where two scribes reporting the same testimony, but there would be slight differences in wording and syntax, because of course they started from shorthand and then had to write out complete sentences. So there were differences, they weren't corrections, but at the end they had to synchronize their two
Afterwards.
versions to make sure we have the official version.
Yeah.
Mom, you always told me that anecdote about how they're sitting in the meadow
Yeah, that's,
recording.
that's, Christian Metz is giving, they're walking up to the Ronneberg, and Martin Bednar and Christian Metz is about to deliver a testimony, so they kind of sit down under a tree, and here's Martin Bednar writing down the thing, and all of a sudden he thinks, wow, I'm running out of paper, and I don't have any more, so what's going to happen first? Will the testimony be completed, or am I going to run out of paper? And just at that instant, he sees Brother Marshall running down from the Ronneberg, and what does he have but a bunch of paper? I mean, this is, they give evidence of that, and Macanade also says that he often knew, because where they were to go next was also declared in testimony, and so therefore little asides. And so therefore, Macanade says, I often knew where we were going to go, because I was given to know that before. And so when I actually heard it, then it seemed, okay, that's right, yeah. So yes, they were on the same page. Howard?
I'm just curious, some faiths have speaking in tongues where you don't understand it and somebody that never occurred here.
I'm sorry, I couldn't
In other words,
understand.
You want to go ahead?
No, he asked, the speaking of tongues that we read about, like in Titus, that didn't happen.
Yes,
One instance, yeah, it happened in one instance
I recall that for some.
Yeah.
in the early 1700s. Johann Karl Gleim, who was also a Werkzeug, presented a short part of it. I think it happened more often, but we have it recorded, this one, or written down. And the first paragraph of it is in some language that one member of the audience understood, and that was a slave who happened to be the son of the prince of, or he was the prince of Kumasia. Is that, if Lanny were here, he would know. Do you know, John?
Yeah.
What's that it?
And the language was Ethiopian or some form.
Okay.
of that,
Yeah, good, thanks. John works so much and so wonderfully in the archive and on other things. And what the beautiful thing about it is, if I translate a testimony, or if John translates a testimony, he will put it in the order, and you can access it on your computer, all the translated testimonies. But without somebody doing that job, we'd all be a little bit.
And actually, I had a comment and a question, not exactly a follow-up to RC's, but the comment is, as many of us know, Christian Metz lived 50 meters from here.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
In the corner here. Christian Metz lived.
Yes, he lived right up here in the,
yeah.
yeah.
And my question was, you mentioned that in retrospect, we can see in Christian Metz's testimonies the preparation for moving the Gemeinde to the United States, even though they couldn't see that or weren't aware of it at the time. But what were some of the clues that you saw that led you to think that? Why did you say that?
Why did I say that? Well, I don't think he knew that they were going. He knew that he would have to somehow lead this community somewhere where they could find a method of sustaining themselves. But
I think John's asking, what are the things in the testimonies that lead you to believe that they're being mentally prepared? One thing that Mom shared with me is how often it mentions gather, come together, unify, be united.
And I think that was what was the first goal, was to gather them all into one place. And so all these people from Switzerland relocated. And then when it came time to go. But as far as Christian Metz, and I didn't see anything in his Tagebuch either, until sometimes you just sense that he may be thinking that, but I don't recall that it was ever stated before that testimony in, what was it?
18, well, the first one was in the 20s. There's a
Well, yeah,
1820s.
rock gets something that you will
Well, no,
eventually.
1820s, there's that one where they're saying something about, yeah, we have to talk about that. I have to find
Yeah,
exact
I'm not
testimony.
sure, John, but
Yeah,
I
was
don't,
just asking, was there some foreshadowing or something that you saw that said, that's leading to this?
I think it's all because of hindsight.
Okay.
Then you can see it a little bit. But if there was something specific that I don't know, but we know what happened. But nobody knew what the plan was until it started happening. I mean, it was just right, I don't know. I wrote I just finished an introduction to the book yesterday, and I wrote a little bit on that subject, but right now I'm confused.
Yeah, there
as to-
are a couple testimonies that I think too in reading them, I'm like, oh, okay, get ready. It's kind of saying, get ready.
Yeah,
Things are going to change for you.
it is stated, but
Yeah.
never where they will go. Or
Not
what will happen.
where, but something's happening.
Yeah. So anyway,
We kind of went through that behind you, Mom, is on the screen back here. These are some of the things that were happening in the world in 1833 when Christian Metz was making all these trips to Switzerland. Like Mom says, he made 4 trips to Switzerland. He made trips to Munich, Saxony, and Zwickau, which are opposite ends of Germany. And then all of this was going on, and the Duke of Wittenberg and advocates of the expansion of the railroad. And the Duke of Wittenberg was saying, let's join the new customs union. And all the German states formed that Zollverein, which they now believe was the first really step towards German unification. And then German unification doesn't take place till 1871. And it's really not till 1871 that there's any kind of measure of religious freedom, really, for most of Germany. Gottfried Duden's 1829 account of his idyllic life as a settler of Missouri is just extremely popular in Germany in 1833. He writes a journal of his time in Missouri about how wonderful Missouri is. But what he also alludes to is the slavery in Missouri. Andrew Jackson is president of the United States, just to put you, and then slavery is abolished in the British Empire, which is the beginning of then the setup for what's going to take place 20 years later, 25 years later in America, which is the American Civil War, which, part of all what's happening is what happens to our community is that they came right before the Civil War and then had to deal with it, both in New York and in their decision not to go to Kansas, their decision not to go, certain places and then ending up in Iowa.
yeah, sometimes his decisions as to what they are not to do are as important as the ones that he made with regard to what they are to do. I mean, at one point, they were even offered Galion, Ohio, to buy it, to the whole city of it, and he said no. That but that did further the land deal between the Indians and the Native Americans and so forth. Okay, any others? I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted.
Is there anything else? Well, we'll take a brief reset while we put up the next slide.